Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In this video, I'm going to talk about managing the internal audit function, which is our 8th chapter of this course, and it's the chapter 9 of our book. Managing the internal audit function talks about how the audit team is managed inside the function of internal auditing. So let's get started. First, we will talk about positioning the internal audit function in the organization, so which is the better position. And then we'll talk about the planning, communicating, and approval, as well as resource management, how the head of the audit team manage the resources of the audit activities and audit function. The policies and procedures for the managing internal auditing function. Also how coordinating assurance effort, how to coordinate assurance effort, or how to make sure that the assurance efforts are coordinated. Also, we'll talk about reporting to the board and the senior management. Then we will move to quality assurance and improvement program. And lastly, we will talk about the use of technology to support the internal audit process as a whole. So let's get started. First, positioning the internal audit function in the organization. When we look at the internal audit position in the organization, we will see that not all organizations will position the internal audit in the same level, or they do not give him or give her the same access and the same authorities. However, only organizations that recognize the importance of the placing internal audit function in a position that maximize its effectiveness and ability to evaluate the efficiency of risk management and control and governance process, these only will place the CIE or the internal audit position function to or at a senior management level. Okay. The standard refer to positioning the internal audit function on a senior management position as the chief audit executive. This is the way we maximize internal audit function the effectiveness of the internal audit function and the ability for the internal audit team. The IIA standard 2000 that talks about managing the internal audit activities states that the chief audit executive must effectively manage the internal audit activity to ensure its add value to the organization. So here it says that who's responsible for managing the team is the chief audit executive, and the chief audit executive must ensure that the internal audit function add value to the organization. And also this is standards when it says that the chief audit executive, it's point to that the internal audit function must be positioned in a senior management position, or to maximize its effectiveness, the internal audit function must be position in a senior management position. Here we will describe how we can make sure that the internal audit function is effectively managed. When we look at the purpose and responsibility in the internal audit charter and see that the internal audit activities that is going on, it achieve the purposes stated in that charter. So that means that the internal audit function is effectively managed. Also, when the internal audit activity and the individual members conform with the standards and the individual members conform with the code of ethics, that means that the internal audit function is effectively managed. Lastly, the successful internal audit function or the internal audit function that is effectively managed, it must consider the trends or any emerging issues that could impact the effectiveness of internal audit function. What is the internal audit charter? We have mentioned it before. This is like the first contract, like a contract, but it isn't. It's stated what the purpose, the responsibility. It's the way how management and internal auditors, how the way the board of directors and the internal audit communicate. So and also the charter is just you will have a charter once in each engagement. Like it's not like an email. It's something that we have only in the beginning of the engagement. So what is the charter? It must be written formally. The charter establish the internal audit function position within the organization. Like in the charter, it must say if it will be positioned at the senior management level or not. Also in the charter, through the charter, the management will give the authority access to record personnel's physical priorities relevant to the performance of the engagement to the internal auditors through that charter. Also in the charter will define the scope of the internal audit activity and also facilitate the periodic assessment of the adequacy of the internal audit function, purpose, authority, and responsibility. So it must state what's the purpose, the authority, and responsibility. The charter should also take into consideration assurance and consulting services. That means that it must state that is it an assurance engagement or is it a consulting engagement. Also, it must state whether, for example, if it's assurance, what is the scope of that assurance? Is it the all organization or particularly a specific department, and so on. The independency and objectivity, we already talked about it in every chapter because it's very important, and we mentioned it here because the way the internal audit function is positioned, it will affect the independency. So if it's positioned at the senior management level, it will ensure the highest level of independency. The IBBF indicates that the internal audit must have an impartial, unbiased, an attitude, and avoid any conflict of interest. This is what objectivity means. The IBBF further outlined this requirement by setting forth guidance on individual activity or individual objectivity, which is just the following. So these to ensure that the internal audit function is has the independency and the objectivity required. So the CAE required to make a staff assigning that prevent potential and actual conflict of interest and bias. This is suggested by the IBBF. What does that mean? That means that the chief audit executive, who is responsible to manage the audit team, to have his staff to assign some confirmation or some paper that prevent them to have any potential conflict of interest or actual conflict of interest. For example, like before any engagement, each of the internal audit, each individual within the internal audit team must sign that he has no investment on that organization, for example, or he has no employee that he has a direct relationship or first or a second relationship with any of the auditee employee. Also, review the internal work result. This is one of the requirements. What does that mean? This means that the internal audit work and result must be reviewed to ensure that the objectivity and independency are not impaired. Also, internal audit objectivity is not negatively affected. Lastly, when the internal audit objectivity, the internal audit function provide a recommendation to enhance the standards or any controls matters, they will not negatively affect the internal audit objectivity. So giving recommendation, it will not harm the internal audit independency and objectivity. This is also, there is some 2 points that it's easy to comprehend that ensure independency and objectivity. Proficiency and due professional care. Proficiency and due professional care, like a concept that must be 100% comprehended by any accountant or any person that will go through either an internal audit job or an external audit job. What do professional care means? Do professional care state that the internal auditors must apply the care and skill expected to a reasonable, prudent, and competent internal auditors. And also, do professional care does not imply infallibility. What does that mean? Do professional care means that when two professional auditors perform the function, we expect them to have the same care, the same way they deal with the stuff, and the same result. It's not exactly the same activity, however, we expect them to have the same result. So do professional care, it's the care skill expected of any professional person. And proficiency, it's the term refers to the knowledge, skills, and other competence required. For example, one of the proficiency is to have the CBA for the external auditors, and for the internal auditors to have the IIA certification is one of the proficiency, but it's not limited to that. You need to have more. Okay. Let's move on to the second subject that talks about planning the internal audit function. The annual internal audit plan that an internal audit team must have it each or in the beginning of each year to plan the activity of that year should be completed in the beginning or prior to the organization fiscal year. What does that mean? That means, like, we do not plan for the next year, like in January 2001, for example. We do not plan the engagement that will happen or that will cover 2002. We need to have it at least start planning in the end of the 2001, but not that far, or we must finish it by January 2002. The process of planning. The planning process can be comprehensive and could be informal or not. So the process can be comprehensive when, like, senior management and the internal audit function collaborate to complete the formal risk assessment on the organization-wide basis to establish like a list of key risk scenario and give them priorities, facing that the organization must be appropriately managed by the organization to achieve the key business objective. Or the planning process could be informal and much less collaborative in nature. So the planning could be done by management and the internal audit team. However, it could be done only by the internal audit function, which is and could be informal, in an informal way. The CAE need to align audit resources for the upcoming year. When he plans, he knows what the resources he needs, so he needs to align it in the beginning of the year. The creation of internal audit plan could be done by using a top-down risk-based approach, or it's better done by using a top-down risk-based approach. The planning should include the goals, the engagement schedule, the staff schedule, and the financial budget. Lastly, the planning process should be a collaborative process involving all levels of management. Why? To ensure that the audit plan is understood and supported by management. So when the internal auditor share the planning process with management, the possibility that management will give them support, it will be better or will be bigger than if the management did not engage in the planning process. Okay, now let's move to the third subject, which is about communication and approval. After the internal audit planning is complete or is established, it's necessary that the chief audit executive to present this plan to the senior management and the board, typically the audit committee. Why? The internal audit plan must be approved by the management and the internal audit committee and the board. A resource requirement and any significant interim changes and the potential application of resource limitation should also included in the communication to the senior management and the board. This is what the standard 2020 stated. The purpose that the internal audit plan, the proposed internal audit plan include list of the proposed audit engagement. So what we are going to do this year, are we going to do an assurance engagement on the accounting department or on the financial department or on the operation department? Are we going to do a consulting engagement also in which department? So we need list of the proposed engagement. Also, we need a rationale for selecting each proposed engagement. What does that mean? Each year we will not cover all the organization on all the engagement. We will select some. So we need to state why we have select this. Lastly, the objective and scope of each proposed engagement must be or might be included on the proposed internal audit plan. Resource management, which is like a big part of our chapter. Resource management is a significant consideration in implementing the internal audit functions plan, is how to allocate the resources. So it's the big, it's the hardest part of a plan. It's the CIE responsibility that he ensure that the resources are appropriately sufficient and effectively deployed to achieve the approved plan. What the management or resource management include our first organizational structure and staffing strategy. Which strategy are we going to use for our staffing inside the internal audit function? We need to know the right size, the staffing plan, or we'll say HR resources, hiring practices, the strategic sourcing. We need to cover training and mentoring, the career planning and professional development, scheduling, financial budget, and lastly, the use of professional practical groups. So first, organizational structure and staffing strategies. Organizational structure and staffing strategy. The internal audit function should be structured in a way that is consistent with the needs of the culture and the organization. It could be either a flat organizational structure or hierarchical structure. The CIE might choose the flat organization structure in which most of the internal audits have more or less but the same level of skills, experience, and seniority. That means that it says it's a flat organizational structure, so it means most of the staff have the same level of skills and experience. So they all be like in the same position inside the function. Typically, this type of organization creates the function that is stable, highly knowledgeable, and very collaborative, because they are like the most professional people. And because of that, they will need little supervision when they perform their work. Also, their work will be more consistent with the standard and more reliable. However, the flat organizational structure tend to result in higher cost because they are very professional people, so they will cost us more. The returning auditors who have the high degree of knowledge and experience, it's not an easy. The other way, it's the hierarchical structure. Other way to structure the internal audit team by this way. And this way it tend to be more dynamic due to the fact that the positions are often rotating, so they will not be in the same position. And also the employee will have like a reason to improve their work because they will aim to have a promotion. So this is why it's more dynamic than the flat way. Also, as the people in the position near to the top of the organization move up and sometimes out of the function, that's why it gives it more dynamic. It allows the growth within the function, the internal audit function, and leads to the collective of diverse skills and fresh perspective with lower base or lower cost base compared to the flat organization structure. However, both type of these internal audit rely on a staff member. They both rely on the profession of their staff. Also, the internal auditors could choose one of these depending on the organization culture. And not all the time flat organization will be the best way, and not all the time the hierarchical structure will be the best way. Depends on the auditee culture and auditee organization structure. And also within the organizational structure, there is aspect of a specialist position. This means that the internal audit function may create a specialist position. This specialist position designed to bring unique or naive sets of skills, experience, and knowledge to bear such engineering actors and writers, data analysts, and etc. So sometimes plus the audit team, we will have a specialist position that are specialized in some aspect, and this aspect that is related to the auditee organization. So for example, if we are going to give an assurance engagement or to provide assurance engagement to an organization on oil market, we need to have an oil engineers or a special position for oil engineers. Okay, let's move to the second aspect that must be considered when managing the internal audit resources. It's the right sizing. Right sizing is an important concept in the staffing and scheduling of the internal audit function. It's important to achieve and maintain the balance of knowledge skill staff to complete the internal audit plan without putting either stress on our staff or having going out of budget. So we need to have balance between our budget and the skills and knowledge we needed to complete our plan. This is true whether the internal audit structure is flat or a hierarchical organized, and it's often a factor when determining what type of a structure is appropriate for the organization. So right sizing, like a factor or the budget, is a factor that we need to consider before we decide are we going to have a flat organizational structure or hierarchical structure. The third concept is staffing or HR. Although some aspect of maintaining appropriate human resources are delegated to the other high-level association in the internal audit function. For example, the director management may do much of the recruiting and initial selection of candidates. The CAE is the one who's responsible. So even like there is managers below the CAE who actually doing the work of hiring people, the CAE is the one who has the primary responsible for sufficiency and management of internal audit resources in a manner that it ensures fulfillment of internal audit responsibility as detailed in the internal audit charter. This includes effectiveness of communication of resources needs and also reporting of a status to senior management and the board. So staffing or HR responsibility, it's upon the shoulder of the chief audit executive. Additionally, the chief audit executive must ensure that the internal audit function has skills and knowledge necessary to carry out the internal audit plan. And also execute the internal audit activity in depth and in the right time expected by senior management and the board, and as stated in the charter. The fourth is hiring practices. Again, the chief audit executive is responsible for hiring associates to fulfill the organizational structure of the internal audit function, and in the way that it maximizes its efficiency effectively, and in a way that provides the necessary skills base and makes good use of the internal audit financial budget. And to do that, the CAE typically tries to hire individuals with the training and expertise in a variety of areas. So we don't need to have the same experience, or it's not a good idea to have the same experience for all of our employees. We need to have a variety of experience, including people who has a profession in financial accounting and reporting, or auditing in financial accounting and reporting. People specialize in IT and business operation, or have experience in business operation, in application laws and regulations, and people, for example, as I said before, if our auditee are an oil organization, we need some people who have an experience in that industry. The second one, or the fifth one, is the strategic sourcing. Strategic sourcing sometimes is referred to as co-sourcing or usually outsourcing. You must know, or you probably know what outsourcing is. What does that mean? Strategic sources allow the chief audit executive to optimize both the skills base and the financial consideration related to staffing. What does that mean? That means through strategic sourcing, the chief audit executive could have a good balance between the skills needed and the financial budget that he need to work within the financial budget. What does it mean? That we do not need to hire all our employee all the time. We could use outsourcing. So for example, I can need or I can have some expertise that are not hired the whole year, just in a part of the year or by hours. And also I need both. I need a stable employee. However, if we have stable employees and outsourcing, this will give us flexibility and a good way to use it, so we could have a good balance between the budget, the financial budget, and the skills needed to complete the internal audit function plan. Training and mentoring. Training and mentoring are very important when managing the employee within the internal audit function. The internal audit team and the internal audit staff need to be developed. It's an important for the team to be developed so they can match the requirement. And for example, the II standard 1220, that's about do professional care, especially or specifically points out that infallibility is not required. However, it is incumbent on the staff to remain current in their knowledge of the industry and the audit skills. What does that mean? That they must remain updated on what is going on and what is going on in the internal audit field. And how would that done? It's primarily done through ongoing training and mentoring, as well as continued professional education. Each individual within the internal audit function need to establish minimum of training and minimum of a professional development requirement, and that's also typically include professional certification. The seventh aspect, but it's not the last aspect, is the career planning and professional development. It's in addition to the training and mentoring required here. A good internal auditing function will have a process in place for career development and succession planning. This allows the associate to develop and implement an overall plan to reach long-term career goals, while remaining a contributed member of the internal audit function. So we need to consider that our team has goals. Each individual of our team is in a progress or is developing himself professionally. A robust career planning and professional development process also will ensure that the internal audit function will continue have the qualified and capable staffing to achieve the approved plan and to achieve the purpose, the authority, and the responsibility that is stated in the charter. So the professional development is required and is one way to ensure that that the internal audit plan is achieved. Now we will move to scheduling. Scheduling, as it says, it's a schedule. It's to put the the timeline for the activities. and will be affected by the budget, and affected by and will affect the budget. So the way we schedule some activity, it will affect our budget, and the budget also will affect our schedule. So for the chief audit executive to maximize the financial budget by creating internal audit teams that, based on their skill and experience, will most effectively and efficiently accomplish the objective of specific engagement. At the same time, the CAE takes into consideration the development needs of the staff and works to balance the development opportunities and also specific engagement that can provide to them, and the need to complete engagement within the scheduled time frame. What does that mean? That means, like, when we, for example, start to manage our schedule for the following year, for example, we need to decide what courses or what improvement will be provided to our staff, and when. For example, on the first month, we do not need to have all of our staff to go and have some courses on the first month, and none of our staff, like on the second month, have anything to do. Why? Because in the first month now we will have nobody to work, and then second month we will have maybe more than we need. So we need to put, for example, the development time, what we need, which engagement we need to, or which activity exactly we need to do it in the first month, in the second month, in the third month, and so on. So scheduling will affect the budget and also will be affected by budget. The ninth concept about resource managing is financial budget. Financial budget is driven primarily by the internal audit plan, also driven by the organizational structure. What staffing strategy are we use? So the chief audit executive must carefully evaluate the financial resources necessary to accomplish the objective set forth on the charter. Lastly, the use of professional group. To effectively and efficiently